Ollie here, and this is my review of Warriors of the Deep. The first story of the 21st season of classic Doctor Who, starring Peter Davison as the Fifth Doctor. Warriors of the Deep is the 131st story overall. It's 4 parts long and is written by Johnny Byrne. So the plot of Warriors of the Deep is as follows. Earth, 2084. Two global superpowers hover on the brink of war. When the TARDIS is forced to make an unplanned visit to Seabase 4, the Doctor, Tegan and Turler find themselves accused of being enemy agents. Quickly embroiled in a deadly game of paranoid intrigue, it becomes clear that others on the base have sabotage and murder in mind. However, there is a greater threat to mankind, the Silurians and the Sea Devils, prehistoric reptiles seeking to reclaim the Earth. Can the Doctor prevent them from implementing their final solution and triggering a war that could wipe out the entire human race? So that is the plot of Warriors of the Deep. So, Warriors of the Deep. It's a notoriously bad story that is disliked by many Whovians. I believe, or I know that I'm in the minority of the fans that actually like Warriors of the Deep. I know that a lot of people actually dislike the story, going as far as saying it's actually one of the worst stories ever made. I actually do really enjoy Warriors of the Deep. I do. At one point, it was one of my favorite Peter Davison stories, but I wouldn't. I mean, I still enjoy it. I do think it's a bit of a guilty pleasure, to be honest. But I understand that the faults were there. The faults were there. I see them, but I do think that it was the faults there. Most of it couldn't be helped. Some of it was just bullshittery done by John Nathan Turner and Eric Saywood. But I think there were some other situations that were pretty much that couldn't be helped. And the production team pretty much had to just go through it. So I do think it is, in my opinion, it's an enjoyable-ish story despite its many flaws. So obviously, most of the stories was faults lied with the troubled production. I think, and I do think that there was some effort. So you can't deny that. A lot of the studio space was actually closed off because of Margaret Thatcher announcing a general election. So some of the studio space was allotted for for election coverage. So Warriors of the Deep had a very limited space. I had to work with that, and it had to be rushed as well. Well, which was because of the elections. So which caused the Mercury looking so bad, and it was I think the costume was actually unfinished as well, and it was actually quite dangerous because the actors inside the Mercury costume were like inhaling the glue, and all that was very dangerous. And I believe Peter Davison actually caught hypothermia when he was knocked into the pool at the end of part one. The sets were alright. I loved how it's basically an underwater base of all sorts, although the sets weren't exactly what Byrne envisioned them to be because he wanted it to be more run down and quite abandoned. And if it was going for if his vision was actually met for the story, I do think it would have been good. The script was actually quite good, and the Pennant and Pennant Roberts' direction was actually quite good. But although there were some very questionable scenes and moments there, but some of it could have been helped, some of it kind of could have been avoided. But I think he made an effort. I think an effort was actually made, and I do think Warriors of the Deep actually had a very good plot, which actually saved a good chunk of the story, and the execution wasn't made properly as was because it was quite the filming was quite rushed. So the story was actually meant to have had like a Cold War theme, but then it had to be removed because they didn't want any. The BBC didn't want any political aspects included. So we see the Sea Devils returning, and the Sea Devils and the Silurians returning from the John Pertwee era, and they're working together. And I thought that was quite cool. The continuity was good as well, even though this was mainly due to Ian Levine's influence, because I think he pretty much had to correct Johnny Byrne in saying that he initially put that the Sea Devils and the Silurian were like outer space aliens, but Ian Levine was like, no. No, and I liked how the Doctor was still wanting the Sea Devils and the Silurians to coexist with the humans, but obviously the reptilians have decided to throw that aspect out of the rulebook because even though the Doctor tried so many times, but then it's just pretty obvious that the humans wanted their own way, so to speak, and they were quite ruthless as well, and they actually wanted all humans to be dead. And Warriors of the Deep is actually quite dark. Like, even though a lot of the Cold War theme was omitted, and I do think if there was included, I think it would have been a very tense story, so to speak. And there were a lot of deaths in this story. a lot, and the only characters that survived were the Doctor Tegan Toller, and another character named Bulek. And this is actually a recurring theme in this season where there is like a lot of death counts in some of the stories where the only survivors are the Doctor and his companions. Or and the pacing could have been a lot better, which is kind of ironic because the story was pretty rushed. And I actually do think the Warriors of the Deep actually has some very good moments. For me personally, I think the moment that actually I remember was at the end when all the Sea Devils, Silurians, and all the humans were all dead, and the Doctor was looking distraught and was just looking around and just said, "There should have been another way." That just shows how dire the situation was. And there was also another questionable scene that was just pretty much, which is very much mocked at by a lot of fans. This is when I think this is in part three when that scene when Doctor Solo was trying to fight the Merca by doing some she was doing some sort of interpretive dance routine, and then she tried to kick it, and then the Merca just ends up electrocuting her and she just dies. And that's another memorable scene for all the wrong reasons. And Michael Gray, the BBC controller at the time, used that scene as evidence to show the BBC higher ups that Doctor Who had run its course. Though I really wonder why Jonathan Taylor decided to keep that scene in. It's just, I don't know. The cliffhangers were quite weak, and an egregious example was when the Doctor was knocked into the pool below when he was struggling with, I think, it was one of the soldiers, and Tegan wanted to rescue him, and Tola was like, "Face it, Tegan, the Doctor is drowned." Like, how can you know that? How can you tell me? Like, the Doctor literally just entered the pool. We were right, and considering the fact that they may not know this, but then obviously the Doctor shouldn't be able to drown from that anyway. So, yeah. And the plot and the cliffhangers of part two and three were pretty much the same. And this is when part two is when the Doctor and Tegan were pretty much cornered by the Merca, and part three, the Doctor and Tegan were cornered by someone with a gun. So yeah, I just think the cliffhangers were quite weak in that area. Onto the performances. Peter Davison, I thought he was quite good, although you can tell he was very disappointed in the story, and I do think he did give it his all here. And one bit I did find funny how he was acting very scared and serious. Well, he was pretty much being serious as the Doctor should be when the Merker was attacking the base. Like it was, even though it was quite bad, so everyone was just so terrified of this shit-looking monster. And it was quite strange to see that at the least. His acting was at the end was quite good when all the Doctor and the Silurians, the Sea Devils, and all the human and all the people on board this sea base were all dead, and then he says there should have been another way. The reason why I liked it because the delivery just shows how disappointed he was, and I do think there was a bit of real life element coming through to so because I think Peter Davison just was quite disappointed how the story turned out, and I think it was just him just letting it all out, just saying there should have been another way. Okay, and then, as I said before, the part when the Doctor fell into the pool, Peter Davison actually caught hypothermia because the water was very cold, and due to budgetary reasons, they couldn't actually heat the pool. Well, and there was actually rumor that this story was one of the reasons why Peter Davison wanted to leave Doctor Who, even though that was debunked because Peter Davison made a decision to leave the show even before they were filming the story. So I do have some problems how the Doctor was actually written in this story, but I'll get to that later on. And the Doctor actually does get an updated outfit. I mean, he changes his sweater, of all things. So the usual sweaters, I think it is around the V line. It's quite different. I think it was like multicolored. Let me have a look. Yeah, it's multicolored. So it has some orangey red, black thing before, but now and then. But before, I think it was just quite this. I think it just had like a singular line or something. Yeah, something like that. Janet Fielding was alright. Tegan doesn't do a great deal, but there was a scene where the Merca tribe managed to break into the base and some debris fell on her. It did reduce her to a damsel in distress role once again, and she's kidnapped and held gunpoint at the end of part three, which is what led to the cliffhanger. Mark Strickson was alright as well, but honestly, I think Tuller was mostly redundant here, and he spends a good deal just wandering around in addition to thinking that the Doctor had drowned, even though he literally just hit the water. And he's pretty much forced to defend the sea base against the Sea Devils and the Silurians. Bit of foreshadowing for his departure story. Yeah, and there's a part where he's actually sent to the sleeping quarters and tries to find a way to escape through the vent. And Camino's left somewhere in the TARDIS. So on to the side casts. They were okay, but aside from Solo, due to reasons I'll get to shortly, but you pretty much know, but they were all quite forgettable and because they all just died. So first off, we have what most of them died. So first off, we have Vorshak. He was the commander of the sea base, and he tried to help the Doctor into stopping the Sea Devils and Silurians, but he dies. Doctor Solo, she was a doctor, as it says, name says in the tin, and she had as well, and she had the ideology to use the East Bloc, which was to end all of Earth's problems. Unfortunately, she's a part of the reasons why Warriors of the Deep was quite bad because she tried to fight the Merca and she tried to kick it about, and she didn't really know what to do. So this is obviously the actor Ingrid Pitt, like she didn't really know what to do, so she pretty much had to make it up on the fly and trying to like fight the Merca off and just ended up killing her. I do think that in the script, I do think that she was meant to have been a bit helpless, which is what led the Merca to kill her. So maybe that's why she pretty much had to change some things up a bit. So we had Nielsen. He was an officer, and he wanted to use the ideology of the Eastern Bloc. So he used Maddox to commit sabotage, and he was caught out and took Tegan hostage. The Doctor blinded him, but then he was later killed by the Sea Devils. Maddox, he was a student that had cybernetic implants, so he could use his mind to gain access to the sea base's computers, which is what the Doctor used later on in the story, I think. Solar reprogrammed him to sabotage the computers, but they were caught by Karina, and Maddox killed her before he was killed by Nielsen. Karina, she was an officer who discovered Nielsen and Nielsen and Solo using Maddox to sabotage the sea base, but she was strangled to death by Maddox. Then we have Bulick. He was an officer that closed the bunkhead, which trapped the Doctor and Tegan with the Merca at the end of the second part. He was able to get the hexchromatic gas, which was quite fatal to the Sea Devils and the Silurians, and he was actually the only one that actually survived because I don't think we didn't see what happened to him precisely. So, lastly, we have Preston. She was an officer and she was basically at the Doctor's side for most of the story, and she even entered the TARDIS, and unfortunately, she was killed by a Sea Devil. So, on to the enemies. I'll be speaking about them together because they're all working together to try and eradicate humans from the earth. So, we have the Sea Devils and the Silurians. Now, based on the water, they wanted to get rid of the humans by using the sea base. The Silurians have pretty much long abandoned their pacifist ways and wanted to kill all humans, so they, alongside the Sea Devils, can try and reclaim Earth. So that plot on paper was actually a good idea, and I think it would have been better if it wasn't for the behind the scenes elements. I think they were alright, but I do have an issue of how they were a bit too trigger happy of how we wanted to kill humans. I understand because they pretty much abandoned their old ways and just wanted to kill everyone, but I do think it was a bit out of character for them. Even the Doctor Who and the Silurians, not all the Silurians wanted the humans dead, but but obviously due to reasons we all know, because the Brigadier pretty much blew up their base. So yeah, the Sea Devils are quite so the Silurians are quite vicious here, and I do think that the Sea Devils, even though they looked quite nice, I like their little samurai gear they had on. I felt as if they were just henchmen for the henchmen slash the muscle for the Sea Devils for the Silurians. So I just think it was just me. Then we also have the Merca. It was this big aquatic creature that broke into the sea base, and a touch of it is quite lethal, and it looks quite horrendous because the BBC was watching it with the production, and it wasn't really meant to have been. And the Doctor ends up killing the Merca. So I do think the Merca would have looked a bit better if they didn't rush the story, so to speak. I'll go through some of the other thoughts, which I did go through some of them already, like the pacing with cliffhangers, out of character Silurians and Sea Devils, just being there for the sake of the plot, and the Mercury itself. There are some more issues that I found, like the direction choices. Even though some were good, but there were just some that were just weird direction choices and just writing choices as well, such as having the Doctor being thrown into the pool and Solo fighting the Merca. And as I said before, Ingrid Pitt pretty much had to include that in herself because I did think that she was just going to stand there, let the Merca kill her, and that was just, yeah. Even though I do think that would have been a better idea, even though it would have outdated the scene a bit, but I do think it would have been better than her half-heartedly trying to fight the Merca. So another big issue I do have with this story is how with the Doctor himself, and sometimes the Doctor, the Fifth Doctor especially, or does kind of had this aliens are better than humans mentality. And there was one point Preston wanted to use the hexachromic gas to kill the Silurians and the Sea Devils, and the Doctor pretty much told her off, saying that the Silurians and the Sea Devils have skills that humans could dream of, and calls out the humans for trying to be trigger happy. Yes, the Doctor does have a point there, but then it is a bit odd trying to point that out because first of all, like this point that the Doctor made out, there was proved so many times, especially in Doctor Who and the Silurians and the Sea Devils, and we already know that. So at this point, the Doctor is just basically just repeating what we already know already. So that just didn't really make any sense. Second of all, I think the Sea Devils and the Silurians, despite the Doctor calling them noble, pretty much killed half the people on board the sea base. Well, the Doctor disproves of that also. I do think that the Doctor should understand that the humans are scared. They don't know what to do. So obviously, it's basically a fight or flight situation. Like I'm sure the Doctor understands this, but then I don't know why the Doctor pretty much had to point that out. It was like it's a situation of kill or be killed. And the fact that the humans wanted to fight back is what pretty much upsets the Doctor. It does make the Doctor look a bit hypocritical. And the last point is he pretty much killed the Merca earlier. But I do like how Turlo was very quick to tell the Doctor that the Silurians and the Sea Devils weren't. But being more advanced doesn't mean the humans shouldn't just lay back and doesn't change their plans. And the Doctor, thank God, he realized that. But I don't really agree with having that scene there. So I do think that if one could actually realize what the producers had to make do what was offered to them, including a very limited budget and limited studio space, aside from the stupid writing decisions, I do think that the Sea Devils could be forgiven, even though it was quite rushed. But then if it was like done properly, I do think it would have been quite passable, so to speak, and it would have been quite better, and it definitely would have the reputation it does today. Yeah. So it is a possible story in my opinion, but I do think that the flaws really let the story down, but some of it could have been helped. If it was all intentional, then it would have been a completely bad story. But even though John Nathan Turner, he was just making some, I don't know what he was, and Eric Sayre as well, I don't know what they were thinking in terms of what they were putting in the script at some points, but I don't think that Sea Devil, Warriors of the Deep actually deserves reputation it gets. So I give the story a 5.5 out of 10. So my next review will be The Awakening. So thanks for watching this review. Please let me know what you thought of Warriors of the Deep. Please leave a comment and subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. Okay, click the notification bell if you want to be notified on any future videos I will post. Until then, see you later.